Moments later, Chester reappeared from behind the house carrying a small box in his mouth. He trotted toward us and deposited the box at our feet. Howie poked at it with his nose. "What's this?" he asked. "Well, as you undoubtedly know," Chester explained, "in order to destroy a vampire, you have to drive a stake through its heart." I groaned. "Not again! Don't you remember what happened the last time you tried that?" Chester immediately began bathing his tail, which is a cat's way of covering his humiliation. "What happened?" asked Howie. "Well," I said, "it seems Chester decided to drive a stake through Bunnicula's heart." "Oh no!" Howie cried. "How could he?" "That's a good question. With the kind of stake Chester selected for the job, it was a little difficult. You see, he thought—" Okay, Chester spat out. "I made a little mistake. Everyone's entitled to one mistake in the course of a lifetime. But don't worry, Harold. I know what type of stake to use now. I've got just the thing." I glanced at the box lying in the grass. "Toothpicks?" I asked. "What better way to spear vegetables through the heart?" "Toothpicks?" I asked again. Chester glared at me. "Yes, toothpicks," he snapped. "What's wrong with toothpicks?" "Oh, nothing," I replied with a shrug. "If you want to make a little white party hors d'oeuvre out of Bunnicula's victims—" "We're not making little white party anythings," he shot back. "We're destroying killer vegetables." "You tell him, Pop," Howie put in. I gave him a look. "Sorry, Uncle Harold," he said. "And we're going to find Bunnicula, bring him back home where he belongs, and save the people in this town from his evil ways." Okay, I said. I agreed to go along, not because I was convinced that the townspeople were really in danger, but because I was worried about poor Bunnicula, out there all alone in the world. If anyone needed saving, it was he. "Can I carry the toothpicks, Pop?" Howie asked. "Sure, kid," Chester said agreeably, "but first—" He selected a toothpick from the box and, with a sudden lunge that made Howie and me jump, neatly speared the white beet lying at our feet. We gazed for a moment at Chester's handiwork. "Ooh, I'll bet that hurt," Howie said, shaking his head. "Looks like an hors d'oeuvre to me," I commented. "Well, now that the critics have been heard from," Chester said, "perhaps we can move on." He lifted his head and, with an air of great importance, began to swagger down the street. "Howie," he called back over his shoulder. "The toothpicks." "Right, Pop," Howie replied, picking up the box with his teeth. I fell into step behind him, and off we went. We walked for blocks. Cautiously, we peered into every driveway, every front porch, every open garage door we passed. Nowhere did we see anything out of the ordinary. Indeed, all over town, people seemed to be going about their lives as usual. When at length I suggested to Chester that we do the same, he drew up short and looked me straight in the eye. "Nonsense!" he exclaimed. "This is not a day for the ordinary, Harold. We can't turn back now. Destiny calls." "Harold!" a far-off voice called out suddenly. I jumped and looked in amazement at Chester. "Did you hear that?" I gasped. Chester nodded. "Chester!" the voice cried. Chester's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he looked wildly about him. "Could it be?" I asked. Is Destiny really calling?" "I don't know," Chester stammered. "Harold! Chester!" the voice called out again. This time it seemed nearer. I could feel my knees starting to quiver. Howie ran over and took refuge between my legs. He looked out sheepishly. It was then that I turned and saw the familiar figure jogging up the sidewalk. "Chester!" I said with relief. "Look who's coming." "Oh, no," he groaned in recognition. "Hello, Max," I said to the approaching bulldog. I noticed that he was wearing the same white turtleneck sweater I'd last seen him in. Chester and I had met Max at Chateau Bow Wow, the kennel where we'd been boarded when the Monroes went on vacation last summer. "Hello, chaps," he said jovially. "I've been calling you and calling you. How have you been? Out for a little exercise?" "Something like that," I said. "Want a jog?" he asked. No thanks. Do you live around here?" "Just moved in a while ago," he replied. "My family used to live on the other side of town. That's our house over there." He nodded over his shoulder. "How do you like it?" "Well, it's bully, except for—" And he mumbled something that sounded like "next door," and pawed at the ground. "Well, Max, it's been great chewing the fat with you," Chester said abruptly, "but we're on an important mission. No time to waste." "Oh, really, Chester? And what, may I ask, are you up to?" "We're in search of white vegetables. Seen any?" Max gave Chester a puzzled look, then shrugged. "Well, I don't know what you want with 'em, but yes, I have seen some, as a matter of fact. Darndest thing. Got up this morning, went out to dig up a bone I buried in the garden last week, and what do you think I saw?" Howie dropped his box of toothpicks. "The early bird getting the worm?" he asked. "Heh heh," chuckled Max. "Clever little whippersnapper, ain't he?" "No, young fellow, what I saw was—" "White vegetables," Chester finished the sentence for him. "Right on the money there, Chester. There must have been, 3 or 4 at least, lying about the garden." "Are they still there?" Chester asked. Max turned down the corners of his already turned down mouth. Guess so, he said. I don't know where they'd have gone to. Right, said Chester. Let's go. That house over there, you say? That's right, Max replied. You want to join us? I asked. No thanks, Harold, old boy, Max replied. I've had enough adventures for one day if it's all the same to you. And it was then I noticed Max's face was covered with scratches. What happened to you? I asked. At first he didn't answer. Then, gazing off into the distance, he said softly, Snowball. Huh? Snowball, he repeated. Then, almost in a daze, he wandered off down the street, muttering to himself under his breath. That was strange, I thought, as I trotted along to catch up with Howie and Chester. But then, Max always was a little peculiar. I wondered what he meant by Snowball. I rounded the corner of the big yellow house Max had indicated was his, to find Chester and Howie were making stabs at what looked like a large white rutabaga. Their toothpicks kept breaking. Boy, this one's tough, Howie said. I noticed 2 other white objects lying nearby with toothpicks already sticking out of them. With a great deal of effort, Chester finally succeeded in getting the rutabaga to accept its tooth-pickled fate. Whew, Chester said, wiping his brow. He looked around him at the rest of the garden. Doesn't look as if there are any more to take care of here. Howie scanned the garden as well. No more here, he echoed. Then he attacked a hose lying nearby. Growling, he wrestled with it, ignoring the fact that the sprinkler at the other end was bouncing and splashing all over the garden. Try not to leave teeth marks, I advised. Come on, Howie, knock it off, Chester said. We gotta keep moving. You can play later. He started off in the direction of the street when he came to a sudden halt. What if? He said, shaking his head. No, he couldn't have. Not in one night. Still. What are you talking about? I asked. Howie let out a yelp as water spurted into his eyes. He began barking furiously at the leaking hose. Nice work, I observed. You not only left teeth marks, you've expanded the entire sprinkler system. May I suggest we get out of here, fast? Wait a minute, said Chester. Howie ran up to Chester's side, no doubt seeking his protection from the attacking garden hose. I just had a thought. What if Bunnicula's met up with one of his own kind? You know how they multiply, Harold. Well, I don't, really, I replied, but if they're like everybody else these days, they probably use those little pocket calculators. I would, except my paws are too big, so I hit all the numbers at once. So I have to do it the old way, and I never could get the hang of it. Let's see, 4 times 6 is 18. Or is it 32? Or... Chester bopped me on the nose with his paw. Ow! Not that kind of multiplying, you twit. Oh, I'm talking about reproduction. I was aghast. Shh, I said, not in front of the child. Oh, it's all right, Uncle Harold, said Howie, who'd overheard the whole conversation. I know all about that stuff. And Pop is right. Rabbits really do multiply like crazy. Right, Chester said. Let's just hope we're not too late. Come on. Wondering how it was that Howie knew so much more about reproduction than barbecues or garden hoses, I lumbered off behind Chester. I was so lost in thought that I didn't even hear him when he began yelling. It's him! I made out at last. It's Bunnicula! Harold, get over here! I ran to join Chester and Howie, who were huddled behind a bush. Chester was looking in the direction of the house next door. There on the porch railing perched a furry white animal. A shadow fell across it so I couldn't completely make it out, but it did look an awful lot like our missing rabbit. Grab him, Chester commanded. You're the only one who can do it, Harold. Get him with your teeth, and carry him on home. Oh, Chester, I protested. You know how I hate getting hair in my mouth. Besides, he looks so peaceful lying like that. Couldn't we just come back and get him later? 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 Chester fairly shouted. Don't you understand anything, Harold? Later may be too late. Get him now. He pushed at my haunches, and I set off toward the porch. Get him, Uncle Harold, Howie cried. With a leap, I grabbed the sleeping rabbit in my mouth and took off down the street. That's it, Uncle Harold, I heard Howie call out behind me. Take the bunny and run. I'm sorry, Bunnicula, I thought. I really didn't want to do this. Hopefully you'll just sleep through the whole thing, and when we get you home, I'll tuck you in your little bed in your little cage, and you'll be all nice and cozy, and... That's when I heard the woman scream, Help! Help! I looked over my shoulder. Howie and Chester were close behind, but on the porch, where moments before the rabbit had been napping, stood a woman waving her arms in our direction. Help! Someone, police! He's got my cat! My precious cat! My Snowball! Snowball? My mind reeled as I thought of Max's scratched-up face. As best as I could, I looked down at the object I was carrying in my mouth. Its eyes turned up toward to meet mine. There was a gleam in them. A gleam that spelled trouble with a capital S-N-O-W-B-A-L-L. I gulped. Snowball hissed. The woman on the porch screamed, Help! You can say that again, lady, I thought, for both of us.